Stop me if you've heard this one before. I'm not an alcoholic. I just like to drink. I can stop whenever I want. It's a joke that everyone has heard from someone in their adult lives. Every family has the one family member, immediate or extended, that everyone recognizes either has a drinking problem or at least drinks too much. We've all got the one family member that we just assume will either be drinking at family events or will be drunk when they get there. See, my family doesn't drink, so in my situation, I was that family member. That's kind of why I'm an expert on it. I knew that if I ever had to go to any event, I would at least get drunk before I went there because I knew there wasn't going to be drinking. Then I would get there, and then I would hope that no one noticed. Side note, now that I'm sober, I can safely tell you, everyone notices. They're just not saying anything. And as alcoholics, that's what we're relying on, politeness. People are either too polite to bring up their concerns, or honestly, they're just afraid of the confrontation. It's a big gun to pull out. Even if you see a loved one who is drinking at every event, you can't just call that person an alcoholic, even if you think they are, because what if it goes wrong? If you say something, it will strain your relationship with them. It sucks, it really does. For the most part, all you can do is watch from the sideline. So then the question comes up, the stickiest of all questions, a question that tears families apart. It ruins marriages, alienates children from parents, and destroys friendships. When does someone stop being a drinker and start being a drunk? How do you recognize when a loved one isn't living their life and getting drunk, but getting drunk to live their life? At what point did they become powerless over it? When is someone an alcoholic? On the second date I ever had with Sarah, she made it very clear that her sister Jennifer was part of the package. Jen is only 20 months younger than Sarah. They grew up together, and Jen is her best friend. There really hasn't been a time where they've lived more than 40 minutes from each other, and even right now, Jennifer lives 2 blocks away from us. I have become extremely close with Jen. We hang out all the time. Hell, Blur is her son, and we're raising him together. And if you don't know who Blur is at this point, and you've stumbled onto this blog by accident, the first time Sarah and I were going to a family function where there was going to be drinking involved, she gave me a warning about Jen and how she acted when she was drunk. Thing is, I was drinking too, so I didn't really care how Jen was acting. It came to my attention that everyone in Sarah's family just kind of acknowledged Jen's drinking was a problem, and they had brought it up to her a few times in the past. But Jen got very defensive about it, so for the most part, people just looked the other way. Now, I want to take a moment to clarify something for content. Around the end of my drinking career, I was drinking a half gallon of vodka a day. I was drinking when I woke up, drinking on the job, drinking to go to sleep. Wherever I was, you could be assured I had a water bottle filled with vodka somewhere within arm's reach, even if you couldn't see it. If I stopped drinking, 2 days later I was in the hospital with seizures and detoxes. There was absolutely no doubt in my mind that I was a full-fledged alcoholic. So when people told me Jen had a drinking problem, I couldn't see it. I had a drinking problem. Jennifer just got drunk at events and acted like an ass. But so did half the country. I saw nothing wrong with this. And this went on for years. It was just common knowledge. Jen couldn't hold her liquor, and we all just looked away. Blur's dad isn't in his life, so it has always just been him and Jen. When Blur was little, Jen would get drunk, make a fool of herself, and embarrass her son a lot. But then, she would immediately go online the next day and make it up to him by buying him a BB gun or something. She was essentially buying back the love he had lost for her when he saw her drunk. And it worked. It worked for years. Probably still would be working if he stayed 9 years old forever. Once he entered into his teenage years, though, he started noticing things more. He saw the way Sarah talked to his mom. He saw how the family reacted to her drinking. And to make things worse, or better, depending on your perspective, his other parental figure was now me, a guy who was in a successful recovery. Blur could talk to me now, whereas before it was just him and Jen. I was a safe space for him to confide in. The pot was starting to boil. Then, in September 2021, I introduced Jennifer to her boyfriend, Dan. Poor Dan. He just wanted carpet. He was a client of mine, and he said he was recently single, so I played matchmaker. Dan was like nothing Jen had experienced before. He was nice. He was stable. He had a job. He had his own house, and most importantly, he wasn't a drinker. We would all vacation together, spend weekends away. Blur liked him a lot too. Everything was great. In the years I had known Jen, this was the happiest I had ever seen her. She had a string of bad men in her life, and she truly deserved a win, and Dan was that victory. Except, Jen was still drinking, and now Dan was able to bring this to light. Dan was seeing sides of it that we didn't see, and Dan didn't need to be polite. He wasn't family. Also, Dan didn't drink, and that will never work if one of you drinks and the other doesn't. You can try to make it work, but it never will. I know this. They lasted about a year and a half. Then it eventually got to be too much for Dan, and he left. Her son was spending more time with me away from her. Sarah was lecturing her, and now Dan left her too. That was it. That was the event. Jennifer turned pro. I'm mad at myself in retrospect for not noticing it, but the thing is, I was constantly comparing drunks to myself, and if they weren't as bad as me, they weren't an alcoholic. It never occurred to me that we come in different shapes. I still always just looked at Jen as my sister-in-law who was just super annoying when she drank, and that was it. She was annoying but harmless. But all that changed on November 21st, 2023. I was home from work and Blur came over to our house. It was 3:30 in the afternoon and he looked upset. He had been crying. I asked what was wrong and he told me he had gone home from school and his mom was drunk. He had therapy that night and his mom and him started fighting, so he left and walked to our house. Jen started texting me, asking me if Blur was there. I said yes, and again, drunks rely on people being polite. And I didn't let her down. I didn't mention that Blur told me she was drunk. I just started texting her about his therapy. She said he had to go and that she would drive him. Sarah started getting involved. Years of politeness were suddenly crumbling down. Sarah was texting both of us. This was long in the making and finally coming to a head. I ended up taking Blur to therapy that night, and afterwards we got pizza and came back to the house. Jen was here. She was still drunk. She had been fighting with Sarah. Blur didn't want to go with her. She was mad at him. She kept saying he was overreacting. Sarah was mad at Jen, and I was mad at Jen. This was a mess. I finally took Blur aside, told him to go with his mom, but I was right down the street. Text me if you need me. They left, and for the first time I started to realize what everyone had been saying all along. Sarah's sister was an alcoholic. She was an alcoholic, and I never even saw it before because I was constantly comparing her to me. The next day I was putting up Christmas decorations. Jennifer came over. It was just her and me. She was trying to explain what happened yesterday, and it was all the greatest hits, one after the other, almost on cue. She talked about how she doesn't drink as much as she used to, how she was having a bad time after Dan left, how she only drinks on days when she doesn't have to work the next day. All the number one singles, all stuff that I had said during my drinking, the stuff all of us had said. She was mad at Sarah for judging her. She called her son a brat. I continued hanging up decorations and I let her get it all out. Then finally she asked it, the question that I had been waiting for. Bob, do you think I'm an alcoholic? I looked at her. I knew the ice that I was on right now. This could end our relationship, but it was more than that. She could take Blur from me. I act like Blur is my son, but he's not. He's Jennifer's son. I knew how I had felt when people told me things I didn't want to hear. This was delicate. I told her to look at it from another point of view. If she read about everything that happened yesterday in the newspaper, what would she think? No context, no background giving, you don't know the people, just reading about a mom, drunk, fighting with her family, and picking up her kid, driving with him, drunk, and getting a DUI, or worse, with the kid in the car. What would you think of that person? What does that person sound like to you? Does that person sound like an alcoholic? Jen stared at me. It's that look you hope you see in someone in a situation like that. All the defenses down, all the anger gone, just vulnerability. It's that look of realization. She got upset. She asked why I never said anything to her earlier about any of this. She told me everyone was always getting on her about the drinking, but I never said a word. All these years, and I never said one thing to her, and she wanted to know why. And I gave her an answer that only someone who had been through all of this is able to give. You never asked me. Jen sat down. We talked for the next few hours. She told me a bunch of stuff. She told me she knew she had a drinking problem. I told her that most alcoholics know they got a drinking problem. I did. I honestly don't remember a lot of what we said. We just covered a lot of ground. But the biggest takeaway from all of it, the final verdict was, she finally asked me, "So what do I do now?" I told her I didn't know. Everyone is different. I kind of found that out just recently. But Alcoholics Anonymous is always a good start. She told me she didn't know how to find a meeting. I laughed and told her that if she couldn't find an AA meeting, she wasn't looking. She said she was scared. She didn't know what to do. I told her I was too at first. We all were. But it was going to get better. Better than she ever could have imagined. Because admitting you're powerless is the first step. And like that moment, right then and there, Jen and I got up, got in the car, and left. And I took her to her first AA meeting. That was on November 22nd, 2023. That was Jen's stop date. That was her start date. Now, stop me if you've heard this one too. As of time of writing, Jen is 1 year, 3 months, and 6 days sober. Her and Dan are back together and talking about getting a house. Jen is not only working her regular full-time job, but has taken on extra work at another facility. Blur has a better relationship with his mother than ever before, a healthy relationship. Jen has poured herself into AA. She attends meetings regularly, she has a sponsor, and she has immersed herself in the program. Jennifer recognized she had a problem, and she decided to change it. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not proud of her, and I try to let her know that as much as I can. So when people ask me if I think someone is an alcoholic, the hard answer is, I don't know. It's hard, almost impossible, to differentiate between a drunk and a drinker. It sucks too. Jennifer is an alcoholic, and I was hanging out with her for years and never knew. But my adage has always been the same. If you're wondering if someone is, or if you yourself are wondering, then you probably already know the answer. I want to thank Jen for letting me write her story in this blog. I obviously asked her permission first, so I thank her for that. I thank her for sharing her son with me. And I thank her for all the laughs and the car rides, and for letting me witness her become the person she was meant to be. I want to thank Jen for always helping with my dad, for being my sounding board for when I need to rant about Sarah, for always cooking on nights when I can't make it home in time, and for always being there for me. Actually, you know what? I just realized writing this. I don't need to itemize everything or thank her for everything individually. It can be summed up with one sentence. Jennifer, I love you, and thanks for becoming my sister.